This is one of 7 such media conferences happening across Canada today. And being that we're on Parliament Hill, we want to speak directly to the Prime Minister enforcing provinces to broker trade, investment, labor mobility agreements such as Alberta and BC have done. These agreements do not address labor mobility issues. They don't secure the economy. They don't increase productivity. They really amount to a ceding to the demands and the wants of corporations, not the needs of Canadian workers and their families. The TILMA deals are not there to help labor mobility. In fact, they will force workers to the lowest standards of certification and therefore, in time, lower wages and benefits. There is no need to protect labor mobility in Canada of the kind that's being proposed. And I'm here today to ask Prime Minister Harper and the provincial premiers, how will provincial trade deals that favor harmonizing downwards occupational and trade standards serve to provide high quality and universal accessibility to services that our country is so renowned for and that Canadians value? CUPE is urging the Harper government to stop catering to corporations and the free market. The services that are offered via the provincial and local governments need to be protected. And to do this, we must create and protect measures around procurement policies to ensure that local governments and governments at all levels aren't held hostage to corporations. It was the Toronto City Council that determined a couple of years ago they wanted to purchase their streetcars from within Ontario from Bombardier, their plant in Thunder Bay. That was a decision arrived at by the City Council in Toronto and acted upon by that council. A TILMA-type deal opens the door for a corporation to contest that, to say, we didn't have an opportunity to bid on that streetcar contract, and we think that's wrong. So the Harper government must stop absolving itself from its responsibility as a federal government. We ask the Harper government right now to not allow the provinces to broker individual deals and to step up and enter these discussions. TILMA trade agreements affect local and provincial governments. They are going to impose constraints on municipalities, and municipalities in Alberta and British Columbia have complained about this. They're going to weaken the fabric of our communities. How? Well, utilities, school boards, libraries, if they lose the ability to make policies that are best for their communities, the community loses. Private corporations and businesses will have the right to undermine provincial and municipal government policies and services, such as I mentioned at the City of Toronto and their streetcars. And challenges will not be decided by a Canadian court, but by a private tribunal, and municipalities in British Columbia and Alberta have been told they won't have a voice in front of those tribunals. It will be the province only. So public services are at risk if TILMA agreements open the floodgates to further privatization of public services by asserting the rights and giving new rights to private service providers. There has been no accountability and no transparency around these discussions to date. To end on the issue of labor mobility, there are no barriers to labor mobility in Canada today. Canadians are free to work across Canada where they choose to. TILMA trade deals push occupational standards and training to the lowest common denominator. Most problems, as Stephen said, have been resolved under the Agreement on Internal Trade consultative process. There's been but a handful of these labor mobility complaints. Only 20% of the Canadian labor force are we speaking of this morning, professions and tradespersons that are regulated and certified, and there's been virtually no problems on this front. So we don't think the deal is about labor mobility. We don't think it's about bringing down trade barriers between provinces. There's been one complaint a year, 90% of which have been resolved consensually. It's about entrenching corporate rights that Canada has signed on to internationally on the domestic front. And it's going to create a situation like we have in Newfoundland and Labrador where natural resources come under the purview of the province. The Williams government is asserting that timber rights and water rights can't be left with a private corporation if they abrogate a 100-year-old deal in that province. Who defends Newfoundland's and Labrador's interests and pays for the tribunal? it's the government of Canada. And these two governments have, at best, not gotten along recently. Are we going to replicate that kind of conundrum on the domestic trade level or labor mobility level? And CUPE says we shouldn't.